Ladies and gentlemen, when a man crowns himself as king, God does not send an army to dethrone him. He simply allows reality to speak, and reality is the voice of God. When a narcissist constructs a life out of illusion, they build a carefully curated image designed to dominate perception, an architecture of deception, control, and counterfeit glory. But God doesn't need to break through that facade with fire or thunder. He simply lets reality unfold. Reality belongs to him, and truth, no matter how long it has been suppressed, has a gravitational pull that drags deception out into the light, no matter how polished the mask may be. The narcissist often moves through life untouched in the beginning, admired even. Their charisma seduces the vulnerable. Their manipulation, disguised as confidence, wins over the naive. For a time, they seem to rise without challenge. But behind the applause is a silent countdown, because God has woven justice into the fabric of the universe, sometimes slow, but always certain. You see it in reputations that gradually unravel, in hidden messages that eventually surface, in children who grow up and speak truth, in the spouse who one day simply walks away. These moments are not accidents. They are consequences built into the law of cause and effect. They are truth incarnate. God allows these consequences not because he needs to punish loudly, but because they pierce through the narcissist's delusion in ways no confrontation could. When relationships crumble, when betrayal becomes a pattern too large to conceal, when admiration fades, the narcissist faces a terrifying reality. They can no longer control the narrative. The story they wrote for the world begins to collapse beneath the weight of accumulated truth. And that collapse is divine, not explosive, not dramatic, but precise. Sometimes it appears as a public scandal, other times as a private breakdown. It might be a career lost or a reputation eroded slowly over years. But it is never random. It is not karma. It is consequence, designed by a moral universe, governed by a creator who does not overlook pride, even when it masquerades as success. This is how God disables the narcissist. He lets them feel the cost of their choices, not all at once, but piece by piece, and every piece is a mirror revealing what they are, what they've become, and who they've harmed. It isn't cruelty. It is mercy with a sharp edge. Only when the narcissist is stripped of illusion is transformation even possible. God's judgment doesn't always roar. Sometimes it is the quiet collapse of a house built on lies. And when that house finally falls, when the image shatters, there is an instant, a moment raw, painful, holy, where truth stands alone. In that moment, through consequences of their own making, the narcissist meets God not as an idea or doctrine, but as unfiltered, unavoidable reality. Time is not just the backdrop to our lives. It is one of the most powerful instruments God uses to reveal truth. For the narcissist, time is initially an ally. Their charm disarms. Their confidence intoxicates. They manipulate and deceive with ease because in the early stages, people haven't lived with them long enough to see the patterns. But time, relentless and patient, makes patterns impossible to ignore. What once seemed like boldness becomes recognized as arrogance. What once appeared as leadership is unmasked as manipulation. The longer the narcissist lives inside their own illusion, the more clearly the truth emerges. God uses time like a mirror whose reflection sharpens with every passing season. Over months and years, the cycles repeat: betrayal, blame-shifting, emotional damage, hollow apologies. In the beginning, the people around them are confused. Later, they grow cautious. Eventually, they see with absolute clarity. Time allows evidence to accumulate, not just facts, but emotional truth. And when people begin to connect those dots, the narcissist's grip weakens. Their ability to control the narrative erodes. No matter how skilled they are at image management, time pulls the mask apart. It is slow erosion, not an explosion, but it is irreversible. Time also changes everything around them. They age, their influence shifts, tactics that once worked lose power. The younger see through them, colleagues grow tired, children mature and question, spouses gather courage and set boundaries. No matter how desperately the narcissist resists, they cannot stop time. They cannot freeze the world in an era that favored their manipulation. God allows time to pass not to punish, but to reveal, to illuminate patterns that cannot survive forever. There is another force in time that works against them, memory. The fog lifts, people remember, they trust their intuition again. They look back and see clearly the manipulation, the boundary violations, the diminishment of their worth. The narcissist who once thrived on confusion finds that people are no longer confused. They remember and they speak. God is patient, but he is never passive. He lets time do its slow, precise work, because truth revealed gradually often roots the deepest. The narcissist may win the short game, but they cannot escape the long arc of divine justice. Time exposes, time humbles, time lays bare what was hidden, and when the full weight of time presses upon them, it is not only others who see the truth. The narcissist begins to see it too, not in a dramatic flash, but in the steady accumulation of a life built on patterns that can no longer sustain themselves. Few consequences are more devastating than isolation. And for the narcissist, isolation rarely arrives suddenly. It arrives like fog, slow, quiet, unnoticed until it surrounds them entirely. In the beginning, they appear surrounded by people, friends, followers, admirers. But as manipulation erodes emotional safety and relationships become increasingly transactional, something shifts. Connections that once looked solid begin to hollow out. People remain physically present, but emotionally withdrawn. Over time, even their physical presence disappears. God rarely needs to strike someone down to humble them. Sometimes he allows them to rise. He lets them gather influence, applause, attention, only to show them that none of it can fill the void. He lets the narcissist climb the ladder of success only for them to discover the top is not a throne but a cage, because what they chase, adoration, control, affirmation, cannot replace what they need, intimacy, trust, genuine connection. And those cannot be faked. They can only be earned. As time passes, their inability to foster real love leaves them surrounded by people who no longer believe in them. Their outward life may still look impressive, but internally it becomes increasingly hollow. The phone stops ringing, conversations turn shallow, relationships reduce to roles, who obeys, who flatters, who serves, but no one truly knows them, no one truly loves them, because they never allowed themselves to be known. God permits this isolation as both judgment and mercy. It is the natural consequence of pride, but it is also sacred space where self-reflection finally begins. When the noise fades, when the spotlight dims, when they are left alone with their thoughts, they face the silence they've avoided their entire life. And in that silence, the echoes begin. The echo of twisted words, of people pushed away, of a life full on the outside but empty on the inside. The most painful part is this: the isolation is self-created. People didn't leave because of injustice. They left because they were exhausted, used, dismissed, trust eroded slowly, one breach at a time. And once trust is gone, it rarely returns. The narcissist may try to replace lost relationships with new ones, but the same cycle repeats because the root remains untouched. This is how God disables them, by letting them taste the consequences of relational bankruptcy. He does not shout over their pride. He simply steps aside and lets their world grow quiet. In that quiet, they meet themselves, and for many, it is the first time they realize that though they demanded attention from everyone, they are profoundly alone. Loss is one of God's most powerful tools for dismantling pride. It is not random. It is not always punishment. Sometimes loss is mercy disguised as pain. For the narcissist, loss isn't just a setback. It is the removal of something essential to their illusion of control. When that support is taken away, the entire false identity trembles. They build their lives on superiority, fed by validation, admiration, and influence. Their self-worth depends on perception. They gather people and possessions that reinforce their desired image, but God, in His wisdom, allows some of those supports to collapse, not to destroy them, but to awaken them. Loss may come as a failed relationship, a betrayal they couldn't foresee, the death of someone they couldn't manipulate, or the collapse of a career they turned into an idol. When these losses hit, something holy occurs. The mask fractures, loss exposes what success hides. When everything is going well, the narcissist can maintain the illusion of strength. But when the applause stops, when plans collapse, when the room empties, they face the truth. No external achievement can fill internal emptiness. And in that broken place, God speaks, not with fury, but with clarity. Loss becomes a mirror. They begin to see the cost of their actions. They remember the people they dismissed, the hearts they wounded, the loyalty they exploited. And for a brief, piercing moment, they stand before the wreckage they've created. It is crushing, but it is sacred, because in that moment they are not powerful, they are human. Yet loss does not guarantee change. Some grow harder, clinging tighter to control, but others, the rare ones, allow loss to humble them. They allow it to bring them to their knees, and in that posture of surrender, they begin to shift. They stop viewing loss as defeat and begin to see it as invitation, a doorway to becoming something more than the persona they crafted. God uses loss because success inflates the ego, flattery blinds, but loss breaks through. It interrupts their illusion, it disrupts their story, and in that disruption, they finally hear truth, not from the world, but from within. One of the most profound judgments God allows is self-exposure, not by others, but by oneself. For the narcissist, this is the unraveling that matters most, not public embarrassment, not loss of status, but the slow, unavoidable confrontation with their own reflection. God doesn't need enemies or disasters. Sometimes He simply holds the mirror steady. The narcissist avoids true self-reflection at all costs. They build a self-curated identity, untouchable, superior, invincible. Any threat to that identity is dismissed, minimized, or blamed on someone else. Their inner world becomes filled with denial, but over time, through isolation, failure, stillness, God quietly peels back the layers, not with force but with truth. He lets them feel the weight of their own soul. This exposure terrifies them. It removes their armor. It reveals insecurities buried beneath arrogance, fear behind control, brokenness behind performance. They begin to see that much of their life was fueled not by strength, but by desperation. Desperation to be seen, loved, validated at any cost. And in that moment, something sacred happens. Their power no longer protects. Their success no longer shields. They stand naked before truth. This kind of reckoning often comes through quiet suffering, the kind that gnaws at the soul, shame that won't fade, regret that won't silence, anxiety that no longer numbs. God allows these emotions to rise, not to crush them, but to confront them with who they have become. Praise no longer soothes, accolades no longer distract. What remains is the internal dissonance they cannot escape, and there is mercy in this, because seeing oneself clearly, though painful, is the first step toward transformation. The narcissist finally faces a choice, not about image, but about identity. Do they acknowledge truth and change, or cling to illusion and sink deeper into denial? God does not expose to destroy. He exposes to offer escape from the prison of self-deception. Some turn away, unable to bear the shame, but others, the few, stay in the light long enough to be remade, and when they do, what began as judgment becomes transformation. But it all begins when the lies collapse, and all that remains is truth staring back. Many believe that those consumed by pride, manipulation, and self-worship are beyond redemption, but that belief misunderstands the mercy of God. Even for the narcissist, for the one who wounded others, lived in illusion, and worshipped the self-redemption remains possible. Not easy, not painless, but possible. God disables not to destroy, but to invite transformation. Redemption is not soft, it is death and rebirth. It demands the narcissist face what they've avoided all their life, raw truth, deep repentance, absolute surrender. And even then, redemption does not guarantee restoration. Some relationships may never heal, some wounds may remain, but redemption has nothing to do with recovering reputation. It is about recovering the soul. For the narcissist, redemption often begins at the bottom. After applause fades, support systems collapse, and the emptiness becomes undeniable. In that place, God does something strange. He does not abandon them. He draws near, not to soothe the ego, but to awaken the spirit. The narcissist who once needed to be the center of every room is invited to leave the stage entirely, not to disappear, but to finally become real. This process is brutal. It dismantles everything false. They must acknowledge the pain they caused, not vaguely, but specifically. They must confess with clarity. They must learn humility, not perform it, but live it. And humility, for someone who has avoided it all their life, feels like death. And in a sense it is the death of the persona, but on the other side of that death is life, real life. Redemption does not erase the past, but it transforms the future. The narcissist who accepts it may never regain what they lost, but they gain something far more valuable: authenticity, empathy, truth, the ability to love without control. Transformation is slow and imperfect, but it is sacred. God disables to create space for this rebirth. He dismantles the idol of self so that something eternal can take its place. He never forces transformation. The door is always open, but they must choose to walk through it. Some cling to pride until the end, but some, the rare ones, fall to their knees and whisper, "I am done pretending." And that moment is the beginning of everything new, not because they found themselves, but because they finally lost themselves and found God instead.